Okay.
Okay, now are we on live? Huh?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome, guys. Good evening. Today we have Mr. Jesse Schell with us to
Hello.
make a Q&A session. I guess everybody knows who is Mr. Jesse Schell, but for those who don't, let me briefly introduce him. Jesse Schell is CEO of Schell Games, known for titles like I Expect You to Die and Among Us VR. And he is lecturer at Carnegie Mellon Entertainment Technology Center. And he is the author of the game design book, Art of Game Design, the Book of Lenses. Sir, thanks for accepting, and we are honored and we have pleasure to have you here. Welcome.
Yeah, no, so glad I could have a chat with everybody today. And yeah, happy to talk about any and all topics related to the game industry, anything that would be useful.
Thank you. We have prepared a question pool. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Ali's internet connection is a bit weak, sorry for that. We have prepared a question pool. We gathered questions from audiences via Google form from our social media, and as club we prepared some questions as well. And if my sound is clear, I will start without further ado.
Yep, sounds pretty good. Can you hear me okay? Is everything good with my sound and video? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, all right. Okay, then I'm starting with my first question. My first question is about where to start design a game. And one of your GDC talks, you mentioned the bus analogy, which made me think a lot. And the bus analogy claims that we should first gather the people and then we should decide where to go. And in one of your GDC talks, you talked a lot about the patterns of Christopher Alexander, especially the strong center and boundaries. Those got my attention. And I am curious about where should we start to design a game? What should be our center? Because figuring out the center and building the outward, I guess, is the ideal way to design engaging experience.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I don't think the answer is very obvious. I always think of what the game designer, the board game designer Reiner Knizia says. He says if you always start in the same place, you always end up in the same place. And I think there's some truth to that. I don't think there is one place to start making a game. The different games have very different emotional centers. With one game, the real center of it might be a clever rule idea, and for another game it might be a certain emotional state, and for another game it might be like a certain visual look or an expression about a certain character. You can begin anywhere, and then just sort of figure out, okay, well, what's the part that I definitely feel like is important, and then build out around it. And that, so you might begin with the technology, you might begin with gameplay, you might begin with aesthetics, you might begin with story. You could begin with any of those places, and then build out. That isn't the message people want to hear. People want to hear, like, no, there's this one place, but it isn't always true. Like when you think about the analogy with movies, remember people talking about Pixar and saying Pixar never begins with technology. They always begin with story. Story's the most important thing to them. And I say, okay, no, that's not true. Like, look at the movie Toy Story. Did they make that movie that way because telling a story about plastic toys is the best story to tell? No, they realized they couldn't render human beings very well, but they were very good at rendering plastic toys. So they started with this technological constraint and said, what's the best story we could tell using plastic toys? Because our technology is really good at that. So how can we use that and what it's good at? And the same thing with games. When we made the game I Expect You to Die, that game happened kind of by accident. We were exploring VR, and we had some people on our team who didn't really believe in VR very much. They didn't think it was worth the trouble. And so they were building a prototype because I asked them, please build me some VR prototypes. But I warned them, I'm like, please don't make the camera move around because that could make people sick. So try and like make it so you teleport from place to place. And they ignored me. They ignored me and they made the camera flying all over the place. And I put it on, I'm trying, I'm like, whoa, 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 this is flying around kind of a lot in ways that are gonna make people sick. Why, I asked you not to do that, why did you do that? And they got all mad. And they said, see, this is the problem with VR. The problem is you put on the headset, you wanna feel like a superhero, but you're not a superhero, you're tied to a chair because you can't move. What kind of superhero gets tied to a chair? And we all looked at each other and said, oh, wow, superheroes get tied to chairs all the time. That's always happening to superheroes. But no one ever made a game about that. What if we made a game all about like, yeah, you're trapped in this place and you can't move and you've got to like, you know, be clever and find your way out of it. Like, we can make a whole game about that. So it started with this kind of, that was sort of the heart and the emotional center of this. And we ended up building the entire game around it. So it usually comes down to, you want to start by falling in love with something. And it could be technology, it could be a story, it could be solving a certain kind of problem. Maybe it's an educational game. You're really focused on trying to educate people about something very specific, but it could be anything. And start there and figure out what's strong about that and then build out, because you want to build on something that means something to somebody.
Okay, thank you for this great answer. And my next question is about my country. In recent years, in our universities, have started to establish departments specified on digital game design, and we see that their numbers are getting increasing. And I would like to hear your thoughts about academic side of the game design, because in one of your speeches, you gave an example about Henry Ford inventing the assembly line. Yeah, and he got inspired from a slaughterhouse. You know, he didn't go to an industrial engineering school or whatsoever. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about this.
Yeah, so the whole business of game design in academia is interesting, because it's still new relatively new in the schools. There isn't a lot of tradition with it, so everyone's still figuring it out, trying to figure out how to do it. Different schools have very different focus. Some schools are very focused on the hard skills. We're going to teach you game programming, or we're going to teach you game art, and they focus on that. Others are more focused on design, or very experimental design, or just being kind of cutting edge technologically, like very new cutting edge interfaces, things that have never been done. And then other places have a more academic focus, which maybe they're taking a very artistic point of view, and they're kind of games as works of art as opposed to entertainment, or possibly people do critical analysis and critical study of games. So there's lots of different ways to go through it. It all depends on what your goal is. The thing I offer to everybody, what I talk to all students about, the game industry is different than some other industries because of what it values. Some industries put a lot of value on, a person got a degree from this place, and that's what we really care about. Game industry doesn't care about that very much. The game industry cares more about, well, what have you built? What have you done? What can you show me? And a degree is nice. That's good, and the thing about that is a degree shows, if you get good grades in your classes, you have a good transcript, what that shows everyone is you can follow directions. You can take orders and follow directions. You can do what you're told, which is good and important. That's good. But it isn't the only thing that is important. And in fact, it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is usually, were you able to start a project, follow it through, and finish it? Something that was like your own concept that you believed in, you followed through, and you actually got it to completion. Because anybody can start a project, but like doing the hard work of going from the idea to something that actually works and is good in some way is really hard. And that's what people look for the most. So anybody who's going to school for games, I always advise, sure, take your classes. That's all good, learn what you can learn there. But you should also always have your own project going, your own vision, your own thing that you want to find a way to build. And you need to make that part, you need to think of that as part of your education. Use what you're learning at the school to help, help you focus, help you learn about how to do things better, but then also be building your own work. Because you'll learn the most that way. You'll build a better portfolio. You'll take more ownership of your education. That all definitely is how to get the most out of an educational program.
Okay, thank you. The next question is a bit personal, but I would like to ask to you. I'm a huge fan of Randy Pausch and the last lecture. I've watched it a few times and it's like affected me a lot. And in one of your podcasts, I learned that Randy Pausch encouraged you to give lessons at Carnegie Mellon, at ETC. And like, I would like to know, what was the clearest memory of Randy Pausch? What was his most representative characteristics that you remember of him? I am a bit curious about this.
Oh boy, what a question. Oh boy, Randy was such an interesting person. I'm like, so many interesting stories. Probably the thing that probably, in terms of understanding Randy Pausch and like where he came from and where he was coming from and what he was about, in my mind, it has to do with his time at Disney, which is where I met him. I met Randy because he had been teaching and he wanted to take a sabbatical. Now, normally when a professor takes a sabbatical, they'll go to another university and they'll spend time at that other university, meeting those other professors and learning, doing some research in someone else's laboratory. Or occasionally they'll do a sabbatical at like some big well-known tech company and they'll do something there. Randy didn't want to do any of those things. He wanted to do his computer science sabbatical at Disney Imagineering. And the reason for that was he'd seen the work. This was let me think. This would have been 1995. He'd seen the work that Disney had been doing with virtual reality in the mid 90s, which was some of the best virtual reality work in the world. A lot of people today are surprised to learn virtual reality was happening back then, but it was just very expensive. And the school he was with didn't really support this. They thought this sounded kind of weird, and he didn't care. He went and did it anyway. He went and did it, made it happen, because he wanted to answer the question, why does the virtual reality work coming out of Disney look so much better than everything that was happening in research labs around the world? Because he'd seen all of the virtual reality that was happening in the research labs, and he saw that Disney was doing it better, and he couldn't understand what it was that they were doing better. And so he chose to do a sabbatical in there, and he found the answer, and the answer was that Disney was putting the artists and the engineers in the same room with each other, working together. That doesn't normally happen at universities. Universities have departments: computer science department, engineering department, business department, art department, and everything's about being just with your own discipline, and very little cross-discipline ends up happening in university research. And he saw the power that happens when artists and engineers work together to build something that they could never build by themselves. And he saw how this worked, he understood it intuitively, and he realized there was a tremendous opportunity. Because once he understood it, he thought, oh, well, how can we bring this to the university? And so he went to Carnegie Mellon and got this new program going that was all about bringing artists and engineers together. It was difficult because that's not how universities normally do things. It had to be done outside of the departments. But the thing about Randy was he never would let the normal way of doing things get in the way. He would see how things should be, and he would say, yeah, I don't care about any of that, and he would just knock everything down in order to get to the way that he felt things should be. And it started the Entertainment Technology Center, and it's now been around for, I think, over 25 years now as a very successful and meaningful program. So, and that was really very much, one of his famous sayings from the last lecture is the walls are for other people, right? The obstacles are for other people. That's not for you. You go around that. That's to keep the others away. You go through it, and that's absolutely what he did.
Yes, thank you very much. It's quite meaningful for me to hear him from you. And now I'm moving on with the next question from our question pool. I'm going to read it. In your view, are we currently experiencing a major paradigm shift in game design? If you were to write a new edition of the art of game design today, what significant new ideas or lenses would you feel are essential to add, and which concepts, if any, might you revise or remove?
So I've already done 3 editions of the art of game design, and I don't just do them to do them. I do them when there's something new to talk about. And the most important thing in the 3rd edition that was recently was adding new content for augmented and virtual reality, because the design for those types of experiences is different. So that edition went out, I can't remember, 5, 6, 7 years ago, maybe, something like that. And so since then, not a lot has changed in the world of game design. There's been small changes, but we haven't had any big revolutions in the marketplace in the last 5 years, I would say. However, my plan very much is that I will have a 4th edition out probably in 2030.
I guess connection is lost here. Let's wait a bit.
Can you still hear me? Is it still good?
Yeah, now we are hear you. You were left that you are going to reveal a fourth edition in 2030. I don't know.
Yep. Okay. No, I'm back here. Yeah. So I'm planning to do for the year 2030 because of AI. The AI is just changing things so drastically. I think 5 years from now, my suspicion is when we look back at the last 5 years, when we look back at 2025, we're going to see games they're going to seem very different, because we are right on the cusp of having intelligent characters present in games all the time. Characters that can talk to you like a normal human being, talk, act, behave, and have emotions like regular people, is going to be such a normal part of games. And then the part of what's interesting with that is not only will they talk to you in the moment, they're going to remember every interaction that they've had with you. And so so people are going to start to have these, we're going to see game genres where you have these long-term relationships with characters, because they'll remember everything that you ever did with them over the years. And that's just going to fundamentally change the medium. It's going to move it from a medium that is primarily very cartoonish and action-based into one that is much more meaningfully emotional, and allowing for a much broader range of experience. And that's all just about to start happening, but it hasn't really started happening yet. So it would be hard for me to write about it right now, because I have a sense of some of the principles of good AI game design, but only the beginning. I think we're going to need to see some real successes in the AI game space. But I think that'll be the biggest change that's coming. And anybody who's going to college right now, get ready, because this is going to be this will be the most exciting, not only the most exciting thing that's going to be happening in games in the next 5 years, this may be the most exciting thing that's ever happened in the history of video games, is the idea of intelligent characters in games. There's a professor, Chris Swain, who he had talked about this for years. He has talked for years and years about how once we have intelligent characters in games, it'll be like when movies went from silent movies to talking pictures. The phrase he uses is, the moment that happened, when we went from silent movies to talking pictures, he says, film became the literature of the 20th century. And the moment we go from games without intelligent characters to having games with them, that's going to be when games become the literature of the 21st century. And we're getting very close. So that's the change I definitely have my eyes on the most.
Yeah, and in one of your talks also, you mentioned that those virtual companions, they will remember our personality, and also they will remember the personality of our ancestors. What's going to happen when we die to those virtual companions? They can still follow along the next generation, and maybe that can be the new way to transfer our collective memory in video game design also.
Yeah, I think the most important thing about these characters is that they don't die, and they'll remember everything about you. They'll spend, just think about how you know, when people choose their online nickname, you know, their online name or things like that, they often choose it when they're quite young. They'll choose it when they're 12 or 13 or 14, and they'll often stay with it for their whole lives. There's I still sometimes use the same one I used when I was 12. And it's going to be the same thing. You're going to have these characters that you developed a relationship with in your young teens, or maybe even younger, and you're going to have that ongoing relationship. And the characters are going to continue just knowing so much about you, and you're going to spend time talking to them. They're just going to know so much, so that after you die, like, what do we just delete them? No, your ancestors are going to, I mean, your descendants are going to want them, right? Because to be able to have somebody around who, like, you know, knows your parents or your grandparents that intimately and can talk to you about them and tell you about all the things they did, it's going to be something people want. So I really do think these characters are going to get handed down from generation to generation. They're going to have deep meanings in the ways that we can't really understand. I think we're going to start to see these characters move beyond just characters in games, and they're going to start to become something that is just much more meaningful to people.
Okay, thank you for this answer. If we have time, I would like to ask a few more questions.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. In one of your GDC talks, you talked about leading a game studio, and you mentioned a concept which is called Sharknadoes, which try to, you know, tear apart our studio. And
Yeah.
you've been leading a studio for long years, and you worked at Disney as a creative director, and that's also a part of leading people. And I would like to know, what was your, like, the most dangerous Sharknado you have ever encountered? And in a quote says, followers excel at following orders and leaders excel in chaotic moments. You know, I'm curious about it.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the thing. I very much believe, like, because when people talk about leading versus following, that's exactly how I think about it. To get anything done, you need some people leading, you need some people following. And the difference, right, is that followers are people who, they know how to take advantage of an orderly situation. When things are orderly, they can execute really well. But when there's chaos, followers don't always know what to do, because they're looking for someone to tell them, like, what to do. They're looking for someone to help create the order. And that's what leaders have to do. Leaders have to confront the chaos and the disorder, and they need to tame it so that the people who are good at getting things done in orderly situation can get things done. So, yeah, boy, the most chaotic, certainly, let's see, wow, in terms of the most chaotic thing I saw happen leadership-wise at the Walt Disney Company, whew, there were sure a lot of them. We definitely saw a lot of chaotic things. I guess here's the biggest, the most important one. So I'd mentioned, you know, doing virtual reality work at Disney in the 90s, and we built a thing called Disney Quest, which was a virtual reality theme park that was in Orlando, Florida. It was part of Disney World for almost 20 years. But when we were building it, it was very exciting, all very cutting edge. We were learning a tremendous amount. But we realized that when it was done, our jobs were in danger, because when it was done, suddenly we were a team of 30 people whose specialty was building virtual reality attractions. And it wasn't clear that Disney needed any more of that, right? And Disney has a long history of, like, when, you know, if they might need to hire 1,000 people to build a theme park, and when that theme park is built, well, we don't need these people anymore. And so there could be a lot of layoffs. And we didn't all want to get laid off. We all loved working together. It was a wonderful team. But we could see that, like, there's there there could be some real trouble for us. And so a few of us, faced that reality and said, okay, well, what else can this team do? If there's no more virtual reality work to do for a while, what else could we do? And we saw at the time, it was late 90s, the internet was starting to become something people cared about. And so we said, well, no one's making internet games for families. Nobody's doing that. We were seeing the beginning of MMOs start to happen. There were a few of them, but they were all very, none of them were very family games. They were all just kind of medieval fantasy battle games. And we thought, okay, family-based online games, this could be very important for Disney. Our team could do it. So we got very aggressive about pitching this idea, even though our mandate was virtual reality, but we knew that was going to end. So we made up this focus on family MMOs, and it worked out. It was a lot of pitching, but we finally got someone to say, yeah, okay, that's worth investing in. And we ended up making a game called Toontown Online, which was the first kids MMO. And it was a very successful project, and we were able to keep the team together for years and years there. But that's just, an example of, like, those are the kinds of things that leadership needs to do when you've got a team that works well together. Leadership has to kind of bend heaven and earth in order to find ways to keep them working together sometimes. And that definitely was one. That was one of the most interesting ones that happened when I was at Disney, definitely.
Okay, thank you. And I want to ask you a question about hiring people. And once you said, when we are evaluating the quality of an employer, we do like skills times passion times respectability. And
Yeah.
one of them, if one of them is zero, then it means that employer has zero value. And I would like to know, how do you hire people? What qualifications you seek for?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really those three things are really important, right? Do they have the skills? Are they good at what they do? Are they passionate about what they do? Because someone who's very skilled but doesn't really care about it, that doesn't go great. So are they passionate about what they do? Are they good at what they do? And then, I mentioned that strange word, respectability, which is really a made up word, a word we made up because it's meant to capture an important idea. Are you able to make other people feel respected? And what's important about that is, if you're good at making other people feel respected, you're almost always an excellent communicator. Because to make other people feel respected, you have to understand where they're coming from and what they care about. And then you have to figure out, well, how do I fit into that? And then you have to communicate with them in a way that makes them understand how you feel, but also taking into account what they care about. And so for people who are able to make others feel respected, very often that's just a shortcut to saying, yeah, this person is a good communicator who cares what other people think. Those things together really are, it is a pretty strong combination. So, when we're hiring, it has a lot to do with, well, what does this particular role require? Because some roles require more communication, less communication, or different types of skills. So it's partly it's partly skills, and it's partly attitude, But one of the things that we always try and remember is it's easy for people to change skills. Someone might, if you've got someone with a great attitude and great communication, but their skills are low, very often over time, their skills will get a lot higher because they care about what they're doing. They're good at talking to people, and everyone likes them. So when people like somebody, they want to help them. And so very often, somebody who's great in these other ways with low skills, the skills will grow. And then pretty soon you have someone with fabulous skills, fabulous communication. But if you have the opposite, you have someone who's very high skills, but their communication and their attitude is bad. It's easy to say, oh, well, they have high skills. Of course we should hire them. It's okay. But do you think their attitude is going to get better? Do you think their communication is going to get better? Almost never, right? That almost never happens. So skills tend to grow. Communication and attitude, they don't usually. Someone who's got a bad attitude often doesn't want to change that way. So a lot of times we'll put a little more focus on attitude, personality, communication as being more important than skill, because those when those things are good, sometimes skill takes care of itself.
Yeah, be a lovable fool rather than competent jerk, you said. It's like being a lovable fool is more useful than being competent but like communicating well.
Right. Yeah, right. Competent jerks versus lovable fools. Right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I would like to ask you a question about the education part of the game design, and I know that you have been working on a game called The Art of Educational Game Design. And once in your speech you said, Einstein got the Nobel because he figured out the relationship between mind and the time, and the next Nobel will be given to the person who finds the relationship between mind and space. So I guess this question is a bit about mind, space, and education. The games of the future are building spaces that architecture could never anticipate. Gravity-free, scale-defying, and inhabited by multiple bodies. Do you think architectural education can be reimagined through these game spaces? In your view, how can games, as a form of design pedagogy, stretch the boundaries of architecture?
Oh, it's a really interesting question. The relationship between real-world architecture and architecture in games. Yeah, no, that's a complicated. It's a complicated question because architecture is so much the art of sculpting space for human activity. People always think of architecture, they think of buildings as a sculpture. They look at a building from a distance and they say, oh, look at the beautiful architecture. But that's not an important part of architecture. It's a part, sure. What does that building look like from a distance? But the important part is, well, that's not, what is this building for, and how does it change somebody's life? What is it like to interact? What is it doing for me? Because a building that's good for living in is very different than a building that's good for going to school in, is different than a building that is designed to save people's lives, right? So people think that maybe game design and architecture don't have a lot to do with each other because they seem so different, but they're not really. They're both about controlling human experience. The purpose of a building is to control my experience. I want to be warm, I want to be dry, I want to connect with other people. There's certain activities I want to do, and the building is like trying to make all of that possible. And games are trying to create experiences this way as well. The difference, of course, with games is usually our body is not interacting with them in a direct way. We're like moving a virtual body through spaces, which means we move, we interact, we intersect in very different ways than we do in the real world. And sometimes it's similar and it's simulated, but many times it's there's just, you know, if you could double jump in the real world, buildings would be built differently, right? In order to account for that. So I think one of the interesting things about games is the fact that they give you different ways to relate to space. It means that in order to make like good architecture in the games, like the architecture in the worlds of the games needs to be necessarily different. And I think that what I love about that is it helps stretch everybody's imagination about like, well, what is our relationship to space and how we should move and how do we connect with other people? And so game spaces, I think, are a wonderful way to sort of experiment with these things and watching that connection between real world architecture and game architecture and as they influence each other. I think it'll be interesting to see how all of that changes over time.
Okay, thank you. You were a professional juggler when you were young, and then you ended up like being a creative director at Disney. Then you founded your own studio, and I'm curious about, like, you were passionate about designing and making games, board games and digital games, but when the time comes, you have to deal with financial problems, coaching and mentoring your employees,
Yep.
and optimizing individuals in your company. And I feel like the most of your time is spent doing those things. But as you mentioned, at the same time, you have to do your magic and you have to work extra in the field you feel confident. And I wonder, those problems like financial communication between employees made you less passionate about this industry?
Oh no, definitely not. This is a hard one to explain to people sometimes. Because people think of, oh, game development, game design is so creative and you're coming up with new ideas and you're wonderful stories and clever rules and all of that. And yeah, there's I'm making it, it's being creative. And yep, that's exciting and that's fun and that's good work to do. But you can't just do that. If you just do that, but you're not dealing with, well, wait, who's paying for all of it? And is everybody communicating well? And is all of this going well? Like none of that, if you don't get the rest of that stuff, then the creative part just can't happen. It just can't, and it doesn't happen. And so some people look at it and say, ugh, gross, I have to do this gross business work, when I'd rather couldn't I just be focusing on the creative part? And I never look at it that way. To me, it's almost the opposite. Like the business work is necessary. Like, in fact, it's almost like the business work causes it. What am I trying to say? To me, the business work can feel very magical because if I go into the right room with the right executive and I make the right pitch where I've thought through the business cases and I've and I understand all of it, and I can make a presentation about here's why you should give me $10 million in order to make this thing, and it's going to help you. And I do that in the right way. They say, great idea. Here's $10 million. Go spend the next 3 years having people like make cartoon games. Like, that's magical that can happen, right? It's like a kind of hard wizardry where if you do it, then everyone gets the privilege of doing the creative work. And so some people look at it and say, oh, I don't value the business work, I only value the creative work. But I look at it differently. I'm like, I value the creative work so much that I'm willing to do this other work so that the creative work can happen. Because none of this happens if you don't go and do that other work. Something I think about all the time is Goethe wrote a play called Faust. And many people know the Faust story. It's about a man who makes a deal with the devil. But very few people have read the play. It actually opens in a very strange, unexpected way because, yep, there's a man making a deal with the devil, but the story begins up in heaven with a conversation between God and the devil where they're basically making a bet. Okay. And that's kind of the framing for the story. But then there's another frame, a bigger frame, a frame outside of God and the devil, somebody above them. And who could that be? Like, how is that possible? Who's outside God and the devil? And the Faust story begins with an empty stage with 3 people on it. And one of them is a business person. One of them is an artist, a poet, and one of them is a comedian. And the comedian and the poet and the business person are having a conversation about, well, what show should we do? We need to put on a show, and what's it going to be? And you would think these 3 people, they could not be more different from each other, right? Business person, so serious, only cares about money. The comedian only cares about, are people having a good time right now? And the artist only cares about, am I doing something meaningful? Am I doing something important? So you could imagine these 3 would have an argument about what to do, but they don't. Because that's the thing that Goethe knew. Instead, all 3 of them understand in order to do anything that's going to meet any of their goals, they need each other. The business person knows if this isn't entertaining and if it's not meaningful, it's not going to make money. And the artist knows if their thing is meaningful, but nobody likes it enough to pay for it, then no one's going to get to experience the meaning. And the comedian knows that if people aren't willing to, if people don't know about it to pay for it, and they don't, and it's just like they laugh and then it's over and they forget it, he knows that's not good enough either. All 3 of them know they need each other. And so they start talking about, well, how can we all work together in order to make something that really is going to make a difference in the world? And so that's very much how I look at it when it comes to doing, the business side of it.
I guess it's similar to enabling dreams of others, like once Wendy Parch said.
Yeah. No, that's definitely, no, that's definitely part of it. It's very rewarding when you can do the things. I mean, I guess to make wonderful things come into the world. I always look at it as like, well, what do I need to do? I want these wonderful things in the world. What do I got to do? Do I need to eat a bug? Do I have to crawl over broken glass? What do I have to do? If that's what I have to do, then let's do that, because then the beautiful things come into the world. So you just have to look like what needs to get done.
Okay, thank you very much. And um, I heard a concept in game design which is called design by subtraction. And I think the person who claimed it was Fumito Ueda. You know, he's the designer of Ico. And he claims that you have to remove all the parts, but the ones who support the core experience you want player to, you know, feel. And I would like to know, how do you decide a part should exist in a game, or it's not really your priority to contain it? Is it about budget, time, or, you know, it's just about how it fits to the experience you have in your mind?
So most important is you have to know what your game is about. If you don't know what your game is really about, like what really is the point and purpose of this game, when is it meeting its objective and when isn't it? If you don't know that, you can't do subtractive design because you don't know what to take away. You're like, I guess everything should be in here. So you put everything in, and I don't know. But if you know what your game is about, then you know what you can take away, because you want your game to be as simple as possible. It's the old saying, it should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. So you can't take everything away, but you want to take away anything that doesn't need to be there. One of the stories I think of, if people know the game Little Big Planet, which was big back, I guess, in the PlayStation 2 days, the team, it was a beautiful little platform game where you kind of design your own platformers, and it was very artistic and very stylish. And one of the features that the team had made for it was a flamethrower. And the flamethrower was cool because it would melt things in the level. And people had real fun with it because it was very juicy. The flames would go everywhere, and the buildings would all melt, and it was really cool to use and fun to use. But the problem was, even though it was fun to use in the moment, it made the levels ugly, because when everything melted, it got really gross and ugly. And the team realized Little Big Planet was all about making worlds that were cute and charming and beautiful. And they realized that as much fun as the flamethrower was, they had to take it away. They couldn't put it in because that's not what this game was about. And so they made the game, I think they made the game stronger by making that choice, because they knew this game was about charming, beautiful worlds. And so they had to make that hard choice. And these are the choices we have to make all the time. And it's good. I mean, very often when you're designing, you're adding. What if we try this, and you keep adding until you're like, oh, this is kind of working, and you're like, oh, now that it's working, what can we take away? And then you want to take away everything that you can to keep it simple. It's it's a bit of an advanced way of thinking. People who are junior designers have a real hard time with subtractive design. They want to add more and more and more and more. They think more is always better. But more seasoned designers start to understand that, no, my design's about something. I should take away anything that isn't core, that isn't really harmonious with the core of the design.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, my next question is about narrative, and I'm fond of and keen on designing narrative. And there are two concepts which confuse my mind quite a bit, and those are embedded and emergent narrative. Um, when we let a player have and create his own narrative, and this is called emergent, but when we design all the experiences, stages, players will move on and feel, that's embedded. But the way I think, you know, there are player types and every player prefer to play a game in a different style. And I guess if we let the player decide all the moves he will make in a game, the player wouldn't extract the most core experience we want him or her to feel. But when we control too much, the player feels like he doesn't, or she doesn't have a control upon the game. It's like we are building a house and the player makes it his home, but the player wouldn't feel something which belongs to him. And I can't solve this, you know, and I want to learn your thoughts about this.
Okay, so this is a complicated idea, but I think I can explain some of it. Oh, also, I should make this my last question because I do need to get to another meeting. So embedded narrative, where the designer puts the story in, versus emergent narrative, where the story rises up from the game. They're both really important ideas. They both can work. So for the easiest way to talk about emergent story is to look at sports, right? People play a game of football and stories come out of it. People are like, can you believe that this happened, then that happened, and then someone took a shot on goal? Like, the stories come out of there. It's emergent narrative from a good structure. That's basically good game design that has people kind of pushing towards goals, allowing for unexpected ways, allows narrative to emerge. That's pretty straightforward. Embedded narrative is more challenging because you have a specific story you want to tell, but you also want people to have freedom. So that's a necessary conflict. And the answer to it is to understand that freedom isn't important. The feeling of freedom is important. You need people to feel like they're making choices when really many of the choices have been made for them. And that's, you know, in my book, I talk about the art of indirect control, and that's what that is. And this is what good storytellers do all the time. They create. One thing to remember is people think when you watch a movie, they're like, oh, I don't have any choice in the movie. That's not true. We make choices all the time. You're watching a movie and you're like, no, don't go in there. You're making choices, right? You don't know what's going to happen. You don't get to decide what's going to happen, but you get to choose what you want to happen. And so we're constantly engaging in any kind of story by making choices. And so good embedded storytelling happens when you set up, you make choices where people, oh, I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I think I know what I want to happen. And then you find ways to surprise people. And so it's a very artful business of weaving a story in, and people think it's their own choices, but really it's choices that the designer made ahead of time and created a world, created an architecture and a space where the things that the player wanted to do and decided to do were exactly what the designer wanted them to do. It's very difficult and it's not for everybody, but when you can do that, that's when it feels very wonderful and magical, because you get the best of both worlds. You get that feeling of freedom, and you were a meaningful part of a powerful story.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Schell. Sorry, thank you for the opportunity. We appreciate it. It was really meaningful, and you gave us amazing insights about games. Thank you for separating your precious time here.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, so glad to talk to people. If there's anything I can be helpful with, folks are happy. I'm easy to find. Look for jesseschell.com. All my information's there, and happy to be helpful if we can. And so glad we could talk today.
Okay, thank you. Guys, today we had Jesse Schell with us, and our next session will be with Mike Grace, the director of Gumball, and see you at that one. Good night, good evening, everybody. Take care of yourself.